Holy shit. We have so much to discuss. So let me start off by saying, guys, that when it comes to, because I'm sure some of you are like, really, you're talking about this now, like after all these months have passed. Here's the thing that you guys need to know about me. When it comes to pop culture phenomenons and like trends that everybody, joins on the bandwagon, I typically don't do that. I don't like to do that. I like to do things on my own time when I feel when I feel like investing. And what happens with me is typically when something becomes a huge trend, I either just never get into it, like Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones, all my friends watch it. I mean, everybody knows somebody who's addicted to that show, was addicted to that show before it ended. I was like, I don't even want to dive in because I know that then I'll get addicted and then I won't leave my house for 60 days. I'll just be watching every episode addictively. So I typically, with these pop culture phenomenons like Tiger King, I either never get into it or I get into it when nobody cares anymore and suddenly I have an interest in it. And that's what happened this weekend. I will also add I don't have a Netflix account, so that, of course, it being a Netflix exclusive show, that limited me. That limited my opportunity to see it because I was like, I don't want to pay for Netflix subscription to see this thing. But this week I got curious about it again and I was like, I really should get around to watching this show that everybody told me to watch. And then I realized that Netflix was doing a free trial, 30-day free trial. So I fucking watched it. And I thought this was going to be like a nice, 1 hour a day thing for me to watch while eating dinner. I gobbled up this shit in a 48-hour period. I spent my weekend watching this show. I watched the first 4 episodes yesterday, Saturday. I watched the last 4 episodes today, Sunday. I have so many thoughts. I was like, I have to talk about this. But for the sake of this channel, the fact that this is a gay channel, LGBT channel, I don't want to like dilute it too much, the content of this channel, by going off on a tangent. But what I do want to say, first off, is my biggest takeaway for those of you who have seen this, my biggest takeaway was nobody cares about these animals. And I'm not even a huge animal person at all, but that was my biggest takeaway, that there's so much hypocrisy on all sides in this subculture of all these people who work with animals day in and day out. They all kind of pretend, I think they do have a connection to animals, but all of it revolves around greed, around ego, and like a monopoly over the industry. Even the animal rights people, so much of it is just about ego and being in control and dominating like the other person's empire and all that. So I thought that was a very interesting thing. And my other biggest takeaway was watching Tiger King. I felt like really it's a weird, eccentric, campy subculture, this like big cat community. And I also love that they call them big cats because that somehow normalizes that they're keeping tigers. It's really tigers and lions and such that they're keeping in their backyards in captivity, but they call it big cats because that makes it sound somehow, more kosher. And they're just big cats. I buy a ton of big cats. But anyway, yeah, it's this campy, very odd and bizarre subculture. But if you think about it, if you take out the element of the big cats, you could replace it with so many other things, and it represents so many other subcultures in America, right? Like if you replace it with guns, if you replace it with cars, if you replace it with politics, like politicians, or any huge industry, the beauty industry, the YouTuber in a community, I felt like I was noticing all these patterns in human behavior that you find in every culture. All this ego, these political clashes between different groups. They did this to me and I have to get my revenge back, and the hypocrisy and people caring about their public image and using that thing, whether it's big cats, whether it's guns, whether it's political status, whether it's who you married, whether it's Hollywood, using it to attract attention, attract money, attract fame, attract, love interests. So for anybody who hasn't watched this, I definitely recommend it. Don't do what I did and wait forever to watch it. Watch it now. It's so interesting from a sociological perspective, anthropological, psychological perspective. But anyway, this is, after all, a gay channel. So I want to talk about the Tiger King himself, Joe Exotic. So Joe Exotic is this walking contradiction. And I don't know about you, but I love a good walking contradiction. Like I love someone who just is like a million things combined in one. He's openly gay, living in bumfuck Oklahoma. Not only is he openly gay in bumfuck Oklahoma, but he's married not to one, two men at the same time. Little polygamy situation going on. And yet at the same time, he's this very like Americana, redneck, like, this is my land, this is my business, nobody comes here and tells me what to do. And it's just so fascinating to observe this human who's like four different stereotypes all put into one vessel, one human vessel that you would never think would fit into one human vessel, because there's just like such different archetypes, I guess. There's something endearing about this guy because he's so eccentric and so odd, and you can tell that a lot of what he does at the end of the day revolves around him wanting support and wanting to feel loved, wanting attention, like, every other human being. But obviously he's batshit crazy, and the things he does to get to that point is disturbing. For me, my favorite episode of the docuseries, and what I felt was the most poignant episode, was I think the second one, the one that focused on the cult-like elements of this community, this subculture, of all these people, these typically patriarchs, who run these, I don't even want to call them zoos because that's too generous, but these like animal grounds where they keep animals in captivity and they make, profitable business from it. There definitely are these cult-like elements where they manipulate people, exploit people to work for them, exploit, love interests, and it's like this trend among them to have these polygamous love affairs. But what's really interesting to me is that this is not something new, right? Like, you see this they talk about it with Scientology, they talk about it with the Mormon community. Like, you see this historically. This is not just in this cat world. But with Joe Exotic, here is the gay version of this cult-like personality pattern. And I realized watching that episode, as far as I know, there's never been an openly gay cult-like personality. He's the first one that I've ever observed. And I thought this was really interesting because you would think somebody who's obsessed with power and control and manipulating people and having like, a web of, a network of minions and subordinates, you would think someone like that doesn't care about gender, doesn't care about sexuality, would want men and women to be loyal subordinates and maybe like sexual slaves and love affairs. But as far as we know, or as far as I know, this is the only time there's a gay version of this. And so that just fascinated me because typically it's straight men who do this, right? Who have an army of women who all look the same, they all dress the same, and they're completely brainwashed to think the guy's brilliant and is a prophet and all this. And with Joe Exotic, it's like everyone knew he was crazy, but there is still a loyalty to him. And it was really interesting too to see that every once in a while you see people who had worked for him kind of break out of the pattern, and they would insult him in a homophobic way. Like, every once in a blue moon in the docuseries, you hear somebody call him a queen, and they don't mean it in a like, yes, queen, like they're not gay themselves. It comes off like it's an easy way for them to give a dig his way. Or at one point somebody called him a bitch. Other than that, though, you don't really pick up on much homophobia throughout the docuseries. So again, that was very interesting to me because that's what we stereotype, right? As a culture, these really conservative, redneck states, you are taught that there's this culture there that's very, very homophobic. But yet here's this guy who runs for office and he has this like odd, loyal fan base. In the beginning of the docuseries, his park is doing very well. He constantly has people coming through to see, these big cats. And I think this is why, I think part of the appeal to this docuseries is, I really think Joe Exotic is like at the heart of it, because I think the walking contradiction that he is it's polarizing, but it's also strangely endearing to the public, that here's this guy who has amassed this empire and who has like a really crazy personality, but yet he gets to be his authentic self in a place where otherwise he normally wouldn't have that liberty. I mean, I think it was the first episode actually where he talks about how his dad essentially disowned him and was like, you're not even going to be at my funeral for being gay. Yet the rest of the docuseries, we see him trying to take control over every element of his life, regardless of his sexuality and regardless of that rejection that had to be traumatizing from his family. Not only does he live as an openly gay man, but he's like very flamboyant. I mean, he has 2 husbands. He wears all these ridiculously flashy, flamboyant outfits. He brags about his, what is it called? Prince Albert, Sir Albert, which you can Google. I'm not going to go into what that is here, Urban Dictionary. But the irony, and actually there's a lot of irony throughout the docuseries, but one of the biggest, points of irony is that this man who, in the beginning, you think he has it all under control, like, wow, like he's done all this on his own and he does what he wants, he says what he wants. But throughout the docuseries, you see that he actually, it's almost like quicksand. The more he tries to control everything, the less he seems to actually be controlling successfully. And I think Joe Exotic is a perfect example of someone who has everybody fooled for a long time, including himself, that he is running the show, but secretly everything is a disaster and everything keeps unfolding. He keeps digging his own grave. And by the end of the docuseries, he's in jail, and he's still in jail. Another thing that was really interesting for me to watch as a gay person was this dynamic that he has with his 2 husbands. About halfway through the show, they basically explained that the 2 guys he was married to kind of woke up out of the spell, that they were like, I'm not really gay, like I want to be with a woman. And apparently you find out that, these 2 guys were having sex with multiple women on the premises who worked there. So I guess they were what we would call hetero-flexible. But just as a gay person who's always known he was gay, it's so odd for me to encounter this dynamic with men who otherwise would live straight lives, but they're convinced into being not only having, gay sex or gay intimate connection, but like marriage. Like, I'm not even married. I can barely get a date. And yet this guy somehow convinces these 2 other men to be in an openly, famously gay, polygamist marriage with him. And so this goes back to the cult-like thing. Just the fact that conventional social mores go out the window. Is it mores or mores? I can never say it right. It's always such an awkward thing to say mores. I'll just say social mores. But it's just so wildly like fascinating to me that somebody could have other people under his spell so successfully that they stop being attracted, or they at least put on hold what they're attracted to, or are willing to convince themselves of being attracted to something additional than what they're really attracted to. It just boggles my mind that someone could manipulate or persuade others so successfully into a dynamic that they otherwise would never be a part of, to the point where they're having, presumably, sex with somebody that they would never be attracted to otherwise. As somebody who grew up always thinking sexuality was so black and white, and I've talked about this in a previous video, it's just so like gnarly for me to imagine that this guy Joe Exotic had an eye for men who he could, in a sense, manipulate enough to get to cross over and do the things he would want to do with them, sexually, emotionally, even, I guess, legally, as an openly gay man living in rural Oklahoma, out of all places. I mean, the whole thing is just gnarly. There's so much to unpack with this docuseries, and again, I wanted to focus on the gay aspect of this, but I can't wait to read your comments and have more discussions about this entire series for those of you who watched it. And again, those of you who didn't, I highly, highly recommend it.